Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LEC Summer Split Finals overview and analysis video. I'm sorry that this one is coming out a little bit later. A lot of things have been going on in the past few days. Hopefully, the content is going to equalize out in the upcoming days with everything getting out as they need to, but this is going to be the final series to go over here in the LEC Summer Split in particular. We're going to know our Summer Split champion. It doesn't really affect all that much, honestly. Really, the only thing that would be changing is just the title, and obviously, it's great to win the LEC. I'm not trying to downplay that, but you can't increase or really decrease your standings here in the season finale. G2 is still going to be one of the top 2 seeds, and Excel is still going to be, in the 3 and 4 seed slot, and so it's not really going to change all that much what happens here, but obviously, winning the LEC is still a really big accomplishment. I don't want to downplay the interestingness, I guess, of this series and, what we can expect from these two teams. They played each other incredibly tough the first time around in winners finals. Hopefully, we get a similarly really good series here in grand finals, but let me know what you guys thought was going to happen in the series and what you thought of the series as a whole down in the comment section below. Would love to know what players impressed you, what players really underperformed in your expectations, and what it means for both of these teams moving into that season finale, that Worlds qualifying system. I would love to know if either of these teams feel like definitive, definite Worlds teams, or if you've got other teams that you're kind of looking for. Would just love to know you guys' thoughts and opinions down there below. But without further ado, let's jump into it. Of course, if you're new here, what we're going to do is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll give a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game, and then at the end of the series, I'm going to give a player of the series a finals MVP, if you will. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Of course, it is a LEC finals matchup, and the only two teams that are left standing here in the summer split are G2 Esports and Excel Esports. Really, really fun matchup. Obviously, this is the same matchup we saw in winners finals, the two teams that ended up winning their groups in group stage. Seeing them be able to make it here to finals is not particularly surprising, especially when we saw the form of the other teams, not only in group stage, but the teams that did end up getting out in Heretics and Fnatic. Neither really looking all that clean, certainly neither looking all that dominant. I think Excel definitely stood above, and G2's just kind of been above everybody over the course of this year. Now, that first series was very competitive. It ended up going to all 5 games. G2 obviously was able to take that series in 5, but Excel fought back pretty hard, and a couple of the players, I think, played really, really well. Odo Omne has been great for this team over this playoff series. Peach and Patrick have been big. Abadaga was arguably the best player on Excel in that series, and so even Limit, I don't want to discredit Limit. I should definitely be bringing his name up as well. Excel has just generally really gotten on the same page, and this is, in my opinion, the clear, at worst, second best team in the LEC at the moment, and G2, unless they're dethroned at the moment, is going to be considered the favorite going into this, because people have just not been able to beat G2 regularly over the course of this year at all. They won winter, they only lost to the champions in Mad Lions in spring, they beat them again at MSI, and now, they're in the finals again in summer, and so they've really just kind of run the LEC in 2023. Not that shocked a lot of people, but they've got to be favorites heading into this series. Everything has clicked for this team. They play really well in the mid game. They're very oppressive to play into, even though I consider that a strength of Excel as well, but their individual talent is ridiculous. Hans and Mickey have been able to outclass everybody in the 2v2 in the bot lane, especially with pressure. Caps can be a little bit hit or miss, but when he hits, he's unbeatable. Yike's been great. Broken Blade has really stepped up recently. Everybody on G2 is clicking, and so Excel certainly has a big task ahead of them, but they certainly made things close before. What's to say they cannot do it again? And so let's go ahead and jump into it. Of course, I'm predicting G2 Esports in this one, as I said at the end of my semifinals video, but I do think it should be fun. Hopefully, that's the hope. But let's find out if it was fun, and let's find out which one of these teams is going to be able to generate early momentum in this series in game number 1, because the winner of game number 1 was G2 Esports. They were able to take the first game in this series. They're going to move up in the series 1-0, and obviously, this is a pretty big deal. Now, this is exactly what happened in winners finals as well. G2 was able to take the first game. It looked relatively dominant, and we all were counting Excel out, saying G2's just head and shoulders above everybody, and, that certainly wasn't the case in that series, but man, this was an oppressive win coming out from G2. Everybody on this team performing at a ridiculously high level. I mean, so many different MVP candidates candidates that you have to try and deal with, and I can understand why it is so difficult to have to go into a team like this in a high-pressure, situation like the finals, and they really stepped up. We got the best versions of basically all of them in game number 1 here. Player of the game is pretty easily, for me, going to go to Caps in the mid lane. This was Claps. I mean, this was Ahri moving everywhere around the map, absolutely dominating the game. And I don't want to say single-handedly winning it for G2, because I think that definitely initiates a conversation and a connotation that maybe the rest of the team wasn't playing as well, that Caps was like the only player playing well. That was certainly not the case. Everybody on G2 really stepped up here, but Caps was definitely the one that I think they were playing through the most. He was so aggro on this Ahri. Oftentimes, we see Ahri take more of a secondary carry, a facilitator, if you will, type of role in the mid lane, more of a charm bot in the back half of the game, building things like Everfrost, being more of a CC bot, that kind of build, right? And especially with things like Kai'Sa on the team and even a Renekton being set up for them isn't necessarily going to be a bad idea, but Caps was not about that life. He was here to deal damage, he was here to kill people, and he succeeded in that goal. He was just phenomenal. If you get the best version of Caps, this team is almost impossible to beat. And then it's not like the rest of the team was slouches either. Yike was phenomenal in the jungle on the Sejuani, just completely generating pressure in the early game. But again, it's the mid game for G2 where everything just completely breaks open. Yike has been so good at taking Caps' pressure and translating it into a ridiculous amount of gold in wherever they need it to be on the map. Hans and Mickey just can't lose in the isolated 2v2, even in a matchup as Kai'Sa Rell into Xayah Braum that I do think is actually very difficult to deal with in the early game, and so everything's just working. Even Broken Blade was good, even if he was probably the one member that was the least noticeable on this team. Yike and Caps were dominant. Hans and Mickey were fantastic. Everything was working for G2. This was a slaughter. And then for Excel on the other side, certainly not how you wanted to play your first ever finals game as an organization, but this is, again, what happened at the beginning of Winners Finals, and you were able to battle back, maybe not win the series, but at the very least be competitive and get very, very close in that series to being able to take it. Unfortunately, I think this game 1 was very demoralizing for them. They end up picking a comp of basically just all the things in the meta that are really strong right now, and they just don't perform on it. Dud of the game is pretty easily going to go to Abadaga in the mid lane, just got outplayed by Caps. The Jace was certainly not it here. He was missing shock blasts left and right, not really dealing any damage on a champion that is pretty easy to pilot, quite frankly, at the current moment, and it just didn't feel like he was all that comfortable on the pick or all that practiced, and I think that definitely came back to bite this team. Not like anybody else on the team really stepped up. Peach had a pretty bad game, was getting out-jungled by Yike, especially in the mid-game where, yes, Peach was trying to make plays. He was moving around the map specifically with Limit to try and pair up with him to make something happen as the tanky duo, but they were just getting completely out-macroed, and once G2 had the advantage, the Ahri just completely turned on the burners and made it very difficult to get back into this game. Patrick was basically useless, even though it wasn't entirely his fault. He just couldn't really play the game. Odoamne was, again, basically useless because he's on Ornn in a matchup where, not only is he going into Renekton, and there's a very high likelihood that he's not going to get, like, this massive advantage or anything early game, but also the rest of his team got absolutely bodied by the time he was moving around the map. Everybody had lost so hard that he was super underpowered as the Ornn just for being neutral, and that's just kind of how the game goes sometimes, especially in the top lane. But Excel just got run over. Their strength this year has kind of been their mid-game macro. I think that's really been one of their biggest, if not their single biggest positives, and they got blasted in that part of the game, which is certainly concerning. But again, I don't want to overreact to one singular game. There is a very high likelihood that they're going to get the opportunity and the chance to kind of play back into this and play something that they're a little bit more comfortable with, if you will, going into G2. But Game 2 is going to be massive for them. You certainly don't want to drop 0-2 to G2 early on in this series. But if you are G2, if you can establish that 2-0 lead early and really say, like, no, actually, we really are the best team in Europe, and it's not even really all that close, that's going to generate so much positive mental for this series. And we've seen what happens when Excel ends up losing their mental. They end up crumbling under the weight of their own pressure. But is that going to happen here in game number 2, or is Excel going to say, we absolutely deserve to be in the finals here, and we're going to make this series interesting? Well, we're going to find out now, because the winner of game number 2 was G2 Esports. They are able to take game number 2. They're going to go up in this series 2-0, and This is not looking good if you are Excel. You don't want to have to win 3 games in a row against G2. That's a very difficult predicament to end up putting yourself in. We haven't really seen a lot of reverse sweeps over the course of 2023, but one of the few that we have actually seen over the course of this year was in the Spring Split LEC Finals, with, of course, BDS going up 2-0 and Mad Lions being able to make that comeback. It's definitely not impossible, but G2, I think, is a little bit of a different beast in this particular scenario. Excel definitely played a lot better in game number 2, or at the very least, I think G2's comp was a lot slower in game number 2, and so Excel had more opportunities, I think, to stay even for a lot of this game, and it wasn't necessarily this gigantic blowout early on, but look at what G2's comp was. You had Jax, you had Kai'Sa, you had Kog'Maw, like, so many tools towards the back half of the game. You can't just go even over the early game. That's going to be an absolute disaster if you are Excel. Now, that being said, I'm quickly just going to talk about draft. I'm not really like the guy that likes to complain about draft. I feel like I'm pretty knowledgeable about draft, as I'm sure you guys know if you watch the channel. It's certainly a strength of mine. Knowing compositions and knowing win conditions, I would say, is certainly something I would consider, you know, relatively high up on my totem pole, but I just don't really like the idea of Kai'Sa plus Kog'Maw. We've seen it in a couple of different regions, and really it's never scratched that itch for me. I think it's way too passive in the early game, and I do think that there are so many ways that you can take advantage of that if you're really aggressive on the other side, or if you just get jungle pressure early. Like, Yike needs to play out of his mind in this game on the Rel in order for this mid game and to be nearly as good as they need it to be. Kog'Maw's not necessarily this, like, uber late game champion, and Kai'Sa can deal damage. Same thing with Jax, right? Like, they all can do damage in the early and mid game, but the setup required in order for them to deal the damage is just significantly more than what, like, Xayah or LeBlanc need to do in that mid game, and so you're putting yourself in an opportunity where even if you are the better players, you don't have the same kind of tools that the enemy team ends up having. And even if I don't think draft is like the end-all be-all, I think, you know, better team can win with the worst draft. I actually think this is the kind of game that ends up explaining that, because obviously one of my tenets on this channel, one of the things that I say pretty frequently in terms of draft and why I always call people out for complaining about it so much, is that I think most drafts have a clear win condition, have something that is like, if you do this, you will win the game. And at the end of the day, really all League of Legends is playing to your team's win condition better than the enemy team plays to their win condition, right? What is G2's win condition in this game? Get to the late game where Kai'Sa and Kog'Maw just have too much damage, try to get some good rel engages, use Jax on flanks, and let Braum protect everybody. That's going to win you the game. If you can hit the part of the game where Kai'Sa and Kog'Maw are dealing the most amount of damage the most consistently throughout that game, then you are simply going to win. That's your win condition, even if it's going to be hard to get there. And for Excel, what's your win condition? To basically just outplay them early, to make sure that you have a gold lead by the time that the Kai'Sa and Kog'Maw get online, to play through your Xayah, who can carry, to play through your LeBlanc, who can carry, to utilize this Pyke, who I don't really like in this comp, but at the very least has an idea. And I just don't think Excel played it nearly as well as G2 did, and that's going to be the end of it, right? Like, you can talk about good draft versus bad draft. Bad draft doesn't matter if you're the better team. Like, for the most part, that's just kind of been true over the course of League of Legends history, and I think that was kind of the case here. G2 was just awesome. Player of the game could go to almost any of them. I'm going to give it to Mickey X on the Braum, because every single time he plays this champ, it feels like he takes so much less damage than anybody else on Braum. It's actually insane how consistent he is on this champ. You're allowed to pick things like Kog'Maw, Kai'Sa. If you're Braum, it's just going to be the best player in the game, and it's been so... I said consistent like 8,000 times, but Mickey X, every single game he plays Braum is just so much better than everybody else that he's playing into. That includes the carries on the enemy team, that includes the setup and facilitators on the enemy team. It doesn't matter. Mickey X on this champion is the best player in the LEC, and he might just be the flat-out best player in the LEC at the current moment. He really has been that good over the past few months. Hans and Caps obviously did their job, but Broken Blade, I think, is going to get super underrated for a phenomenal Jax performance. I think he was probably the best carry in this game, and, you know, Broken Blade hasn't been the one that I think gets brought up a lot on G2 in terms of winning games for them, but I still think he's been really good, and I think he's honestly underrated as a top laner now, certainly one of the top 2 to 3 top laners in the LEC. You know, I think you could make an argument that he's number 1. He's certainly in that conversation, and I don't think he necessarily gets that kind of love anymore, if only because I think there's flashier names at the current moment, but Broken Blade's been awesome. Yike continues to be phenomenal. I mean, a couple of great rel engages, most specifically on that Xayah towards the back half of the game, and then Caps and Hans definitely did their job, but I think it really was the ancillary pieces outside of the Jax in this game that ended up really, I think, causing a lot of the waves and the chaos. And then for Excel on the other side, I don't get it. Like, I don't really get why you played this game so slow. I think you really needed to try and push the tempo at least a little bit, and I think that's what the Pyke pick was for. The problem with that is that Pyke has absolutely no way to get in here. You've got a Rel, you've got a Jax, you've got a Braum. There's just simply no way for Pyke to be able to get on Kai'Sa, to be able to get on Kog'Maw, unless they make some sort of major mistake. Limit was, ironically enough, limiting himself towards the back half of this game, because this champion is just simply never going to have an avenue in, unless they're super far ahead, which they weren't. The rest of the team was, I guess, generally fine. Also, Limit's dud of the game. I don't think I said that. I mean, Patrick certainly had his moments where, like, you just simply can't be getting engaged on his Rel. You need to use ultimate first. Peach was pretty miserable towards the back half of this game. Otoamne wasn't really that good on the Gnar. Abbedagge was dealing damage, but it was basically useless damage, especially as we got later in the game, because it was all going on to Rel, and it was all going on to Braum, because Kai'Sa and Kog'Maw were just playing so safe until the reliable engage ended up going in, and then G2 completely followed up. It's a really good idea. It's a really good strategy. If you can pull it off, it's very risky because, again, there's just so many different ways to exploit it, but when you're able to get through the hard part, capitalizing on the easy part is, a lot easier, and so good for G2, but they're now up 2-0. This series is looking pretty dominant from G2 at this point, and are they going to be able to complete the first sweep in the LEC this split? Basically the first sweep in any major region, with the exception, of course, the LPL Winners Finals. Are they going to be able to complete that with a 3-0, or is Excel going to stay alive in this series? Remember, obviously winning finals doesn't exactly do a whole ton for them, but man, it's Excel's first finals. Wouldn't it be great if that organization was able to lift an LEC trophy? That would be pretty fantastic, and at least winning one game, I think, would definitely put them in a right mental state. So are they going to be able to do it, or is it going to be a quick 3-0? Well, the winner of game number 3 was G2 Esports. They are able to take game 3, and that's going to be it. That's a 3-0 sweep. That is a very quick Summer Split Finals, and G2 are officially your 2023 Summer Split champions. Not that that was really ever in doubt after the middle part of this game number 3. This series just in general felt like a complete domination, like a demolition, if you will. G2 is so good at League of Legends in comparison to everybody else in the LEC at the current moment that it's actually astounding, and they waltzed their way to their second title of 2023 here. And honestly, like, they were pretty damn close to getting all 3 if they hadn't faced Mad Lions and had been able to get out of that. Maybe if they got out of their group in first place in spring and had that extra life, maybe they do go on to finals and end up winning it. But, that's a what if that we're not going to be able to answer. At the very least, they got 2 out of the 3 splits, and with season finals coming up and them now being the number 1 seed, not that they weren't already locked into that at the beginning of this, but, with them being the number 1 seed and the champions in Summer Split, it is basically over. But let's quickly talk about game 3, even though this was like a domination. There really isn't a lot of game to talk about. It's really just a lot of positives for G2 and a lot of negatives for Excel. Everybody on this team stepping up. Everybody on this team was super good. Player of the game in game 3, and in my opinion, my finals MVP is going to go to Mikyx in the support position. What a series, what a game, what a split. What a year from Mikyx. I was so critical of him last year on this Excel team. I was actually really low on him. I thought he was not single-handedly, but pretty close to single-handedly keeping Excel out of Worlds last year. He was just not very good for that team, consistently engaging at bad moments, creating a lot of negative opportunities for the team, but everything has changed over the course of this year. Getting back onto G2, getting with some players that he's played with before, Caps in particular, but Hans, back in the day on Misfits as well, I think has inspired so much confidence in him that he's just gotten better than maybe he's ever been. Like, he's probably the best player in Europe right now. Like, I don't even think that's really all that crazy of a statement to make. He probably is the single best player in Europe at the moment, and that's insane to say. He's finals MVP. He's likely going to be the 2023 season MVP because they only give one, and I think he probably was the most consistent player over the course of that, but he's earned it. He's been super good for the best team in the league, probably their most important player, but Hans has also been fantastic. Didn't really bring him up all that much this series because he did get kind of, his job was a lot easier, I should say, with a lot of the facilitation that both Mickey and Yike were able to do throughout this entire series, but Hans still had to make the most of those opportunities. He still had to go in and deal the damage. It doesn't really matter how well you're being set up. If you don't do anything with it, then it doesn't matter. And Hans continues to be fantastic for this team. Again, another player who has completely turned around what was, a career low in 2022. Same thing for Mickey, right? Both of these players coming off of career low splits and coming back onto G2 and playing some of the best League that they have ever played. Not that that was really all that up for debate. I think we all kind of knew that it was going to be fine for both of these players, but it's good to see it. Yike was awesome. He died in this game, and it was his only death the entire series. I think a lot of people are going to give him player of the series just for that, but I think his impact on the game was a little bit less in terms of, everything going around than maybe Mickey or Caps was in particular, but Yike was still phenomenal, and for a rookie to be as polished and as good as he was this year, arguably the best jungler in the LEC, it's absurd. He's probably going to win Rookie of the Year, and it's rightful. Like, him and Photon are really the only two that I think are in the conversation for me and for a lot of other people, but Vitality sucked, and that really does seem to be the difference maker. I would expect Yike to run away with Rookie of the Year voting. Broken Blade was just straight up better than Odo this series. Caps absolutely dominated the mid lane matchup. G2 was just better. They were dominant in this series, and they were dominant as a team. But for Excel, you gave it your best effort. It certainly wasn't your best series of all time. I think they played a lot worse today than they can play. We saw what can happen when this Excel team locks in and is good against G2 in that winners finals series, but it just wasn't enough here in grand finals. Done of the game in game 3 is going to go to Odo Omne. I do think that the Rumble was probably the most noticeably bad game, which is frustrating because Odo is so good at the Rumble pick, but again, it's everybody on the team. Peach got completely out-jungled this series. He had zero pressure throughout the entirety of any games. He had some, I guess, in game 2, but that's only because G2's comp basically forced him to have it. Abadaga got completely outclassed by Caps. Patrick and Limit were completely outclassed by Hans and Mickey, and Odo Omne was completely outclassed by Broken Blade. Nobody really stepped up on the side of Excel, and while it really was a miracle for this org and for this team to even be in finals in the first place, considering what had happened to them over the course of the year up until this point, I think a lot of people still wanted to see them at least compete at this level, at least maybe take a game, but even if they can't, like, at least make these games close. But none of them really were all that close. G2 just kind of dominated this series from top to bottom, from start to finish, and it was a massive issue for Excel, and they never really had any way to recuperate or recover it, and so an unfortunate way for their summer split to end, but again, they're in the same spot regardless. They're the number 4 seed moving in to the season finals, and they're going to get a chance to qualify for Worlds, and honestly, with how they played up until this finals, I actually think they have a relatively good shot of being able to get that done. The unfortunate part is that you are kind of relying on that form and relying on a lot of these other teams kind of underperforming, but with how they played, hopefully this was more of an outlier for this team. But for G2, congratulations. You are the 2023 Summer Split champions, as you were in winter of this year as well. You're going into the season finale as the number 1 seed, but it's worth noting that even though they were able to win 2 series, they are not locked at all for Worlds. They still have to go ahead and play in that season finale. So as good as this is, they need to keep this momentum up if they don't want to completely collapse down the stretch. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LEC Summer Finals overview and analysis video. I do hope you guys enjoyed it. Up on the screen now, though, it is going to be the playoff bracket for the season finals in the LEC. Of course, the 2 teams that we talked about today had already qualified alongside a bunch of other teams, 4 other teams to be precise, and this is what is going to determine the qualifications for the World Championships from Europe, from the LEC, and really, I think that's a very interesting concept for all 3 splits to essentially just be feeder systems into this one big tournament, this big qualification tournament. I think current form obviously is very up and down for a lot of these teams, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see who ends up making it through. I'm actually going to do a full bracket prediction here for the season finals. I think it would be relatively fun for this relatively short video to include this at the end. I know we're a little ways away from the season finals, but let's go ahead and go over what my mock bracket is going to look like. First and foremost, these are just my predictions and opinions. I very much doubt that things are going to go exactly like I say they will in this, but I do think that I've been relatively spot on with predictions over the course of this year. It's actually probably been my best year in terms of predictions across all of the major regions, and that, not to toot my own horn, is certainly saying something, considering last year I was super high on a team like DRX, and, I talked about Fnatic being able to figure it out and make Worlds. I had a lot of good takes last year, but I feel like this year has been even better in terms of consistency, and so hopefully I can get that right in the season finals as well. But without further ado, let's go ahead and go over my predictions. Of course, the way that this format and this bracket works is G2 and Mad had the top 2 championship points, and so they qualified as seeds 1 and 2. Of course, they're the only two to have won splits in 2023 as well, so that was pretty easy. G2, being the number 1 seed, gets to select which of the 3 and 4 seed they would like to play in round number 1. They ended up selecting BDS, the 3 seed. Excel ended up getting the 4 seed because they made finals, but a really interesting dichotomy there. Obviously, I agree with G2's choice, but we'll get to that. And then, of course, Fnatic and SK, as the 5 and 6 seeds, are immediately going to be slotted into lower bracket. And so they don't have that extra life like everybody in the top 4 does. But you only need to win 1 series in order to qualify for Worlds. If you win it in upper bracket, if you're one of the 2 teams that ends up winning the upper bracket round 1 series, you automatically qualify for the Swiss stage, the main stage at Worlds. Whereas if you win out of the lower bracket, you at the very least are qualified for the play-in game, the play-in series, the, Worlds qualifying series, I think it's officially called, against the North American number 4 seed, but of course you can win and get into the top 3 from there as well. And so, without further ado, let's go ahead and go over what I predict to happen here in the season finals. Starting off with G2 versus BDS. I think this is a really intriguing matchup. G2 obviously very good, but BDS has just been so consistent over the course of this year. I just don't think it's going to be enough to be able to take down G2. I think that they are just too good of a team. They're too consistent of a team. They so clearly feel like the best team in Europe, the best team in the LEC at the current moment. It would just be kind of a travesty for me to go in any other direction, in my opinion. I've got G2 moving on, and of course, with this win, that would officially qualify them for the World Championships. I think anything else would be an absolute, disgrace. Like, if they don't qualify for Worlds, what the hell are we doing? Like, they're so clearly the best team in Europe, and they've been the best team in Europe, and so, they should definitely be getting into Swiss, and I think they'll do it here in the series against BDS. Of course, that means BDS moves down into the lower bracket. I'll talk about that in a second, but the other upper round 1 series is actually very intriguing. You've got Mad Lions taking on Excel, and we saw this in group stage, but Mad was really good throughout almost all of the year, except for the back half of summer. They've lost like 9 or 10 games in a row going into this season finals. Confidence is at an all-time low for them, and Excel is basically the opposite. They were miserable across the entire year up until basically the back half of summer, where they couldn't lose. And so, basically opposite arcs here coming in for Mad and Excel, and I think that makes it an intriguing matchup, but I'm going to have to go with the current form. I'm going to go with Excel in this one. They were able to take down Mad Lions in the group stage, and even though they did kind of get blasted in the finals, I think they proved over the course of not only the group stage, but in the playoffs as well, that they are clearly the second best team in the LEC at the current moment, and I think they should be better than what Mad has been able to offer. However, if Mad can even remotely get back to the form that they were in before all of these series started, before the back half of summer, Mad's a really good team, and they've shown that they've been able to play at a very high level. They just need to be able to do it at a level that they were doing it, a month or 2 ago rather than what they were doing a week ago, right? But I think Excel, in their current form, is the second best team in the LEC, so I've got them moving on and also qualifying for the World Championships for the first time in organization's history, so that's pretty cool. But now we get into the real interesting ones, the lower bracket round number 1. Of course, the way that it's seeded is that the higher seed will end up playing SK Gaming, the lower seed will end up playing Fnatic, and that creates what is, in my opinion, the most interesting matchup that is possible here in the LEC, and it's for a world spot, which is utterly ridiculous here. We've got Team BDS taking on Fnatic. I think this is probably the most 50-50, the most difficult series to predict in the entire tournament. I'll say that right now. There will not be another matchup in the season finals that I have as close as BDS versus Fnatic. I think it's going to be a massively interesting series, certainly one that I think both teams don't want to lose. BDS has been playing the whole year like a Worlds team, but couldn't really get the job done in summer, and Fnatic really did start to, streak down the stretch, but has definitely shown that they still have weaknesses. They're not untouchable, but for me, I think Fnatic's organizational magic is going to kick in, and I think they're going to be able to take the series. I do not think this will be a blowout. I think that this is going to be an incredibly close series between 2 actually good teams, and I feel so bad for BDS because in this mock bracket, they don't end up making Worlds, which I feel like would be a massive disappointment to the players on this team who have played so well over the course of this year, but I have a lot of faith that whatever this org's voodoo magic is that ends up making them better towards the back half of the year, every year over and over again is going to kick back in, and they'll be able to make the World Championships, even if it's a little bit up for debate. But then we've got the final series that ends up choosing one of the top 4 teams here, and this one is a little bit easier for me. It's Mad Lions taking on SK Gaming, and I'm going to have to pick Mad Lions here. I just don't think SK has the firepower to be able to push through. Now, saying that, SK was really good in the group stage. They were way better than they had any right to be, and honestly, they've kind of been that way over the course of the entire year. If SK was able to get the job done and able to take down Mad and qualify for Worlds, I really wouldn't be all that surprised, because it really is more up to the version of Mad Lions that we get than it is the version of SK Gaming that we get. But Mad has just been too consistent over the course of the year up until their complete collapse for me to believe that there's no way for them to be able to take down a team like SK. They just should be more talented than them, and they should be able to take them down. I have faith that this team is going to be able to figure it out, and they're going to be able to get into those World spots. I would be shocked if SK Gaming made Worlds, but the bracket breaking down like this is probably the easiest way for them to make Worlds. If Mad ends up losing in round 1 to Excel, I think Mad is beatable if they're not in good form, which is really good for SK, but I just have to predict that Mad's going to be able to figure it out and get into those Worlds qualifying spots. So that means our 4, quote-unquote international teams are locked here for the LEC, G2 and Excel, obviously, in upper bracket, and then Fnatic and Mad playing to see who ends up being the final team to make Swiss. But let's go ahead and cover our winners finals first, because I think that's the order that it's going to go in real life, and that's going to be G2 taking on Excel. The winner of this immediately goes to grand finals. Not exactly, the biggest thing in the world, but being the number 1 or number 2 seed is going to be better than being the number 3 seed just in general in terms of the matchups that you're going to have internationally. And so, it still is nice, and obviously confidence and momentum showing you can beat teams is important. This is a finals rematch that we just covered, and just like the finals, I would expect G2 to be able to take this series. I think they should be the better team out of these two, and I think they should be able to move on. I just have a really hard time believing anybody's going to be able to take down G2 at the current moment, and I think that's truly what I believe happens here. But then we get that really big matchup, the 3rd, 4th place matchup here, or to find out who's going to be in 4th place between Fnatic and Mad Lions. The loser of this will still have to play an international best of 5 against North America's number 4 seed in order to make the World Championships. And so nothing is guaranteed here. You still have to make sure you're in a good spot. And for me, I'm going to pick Fnatic in this one. I just don't really trust Mad at the current moment, and I think, what would be more apropos than Mad just barely squeaking into an international tournament and then losing to North America to give them that final spot? I just can't think of anything that's more, LEC in the last couple of years than that storyline, but jokes aside, I think Mad absolutely could win this series. Again, if they just get their form back, they should be better, but Fnatic was really good down the stretch of the season, even if they did have quite a few major flaws, specifically the early game, and, if Mad's going to be able to take advantage of that, I could see some problems in the series. I actually think Fnatic has less of a chance of being able to dominate this series than a team like BDS would. I think BDS has a much better matchup into a team like Mad Lions, because BDS really likes to dominate early laning phase, and I think Mad very much can struggle at that, but I think BDS is just, not going to be able to get by Fnatic. I think the magic's going to happen, and so I have Fnatic going over. I would have either team going over here, but I could definitely see a world in which Mad ends up winning as well, and Fnatic, after this year ends up squeaking into a qualifying series. But for me, Fnatic is going to be the final team from the LEC to make the Swiss stage, and Mad will have to go to that World's qualifying series to play against NA's number 4 seed. But then we get the semifinals, Excel taking on Fnatic, the Brexit battle that we saw in the semifinals of the LEC as well, and just like in that, I've got Excel going over. They were so clearly better than Fnatic in that series. I just have a hard time believing that's not going to be the case again. Excel really is clicking, even though they kind of got destroyed here today, and I think they'll be able to, replicate that and move on to the finals. And then, for like the 4th time in the last week and a half, where we've got G2 versus Excel in the finals here, and just like every other time I have G2 going over, I just don't see anybody being able to take down G2. I think they're the best team in Europe by a gigantic margin. If this is Fnatic, I think they get destroyed. If this is Mad Lions, I think they get destroyed. If this is BDS, I think they get destroyed. If it's SK Gaming, I think they get destroyed. I think G2 is that much better than everybody else coming out of the LEC. They're the team that I would expect to actually be able to do something internationally from this region. Everybody else, I definitely still have my question marks about, but I think G2 is a very good team at League of Legends, and I think that they're pretty easily going to be able to figure things out, get to Worlds as the number 1 seed from the LEC, and, hopefully do something internationally. But that would mean that in this hypothetical hypothetical bracket prediction, G2 would be the 1 seed, Excel would be the 2 seed, Fnatic would be the 3 seed, and Mad would be the 4 seed for Europe going to Worlds. I want to know what you guys' thoughts are down in the comment section below. Would you be happy with an outcome like this, or do you think that BDS or SK Gaming or any of the other teams in a different order would be able to make the World Championships? Would love to know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video here today, go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. Of course, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. With, you know, the season finals coming up in the LEC and playoffs basically kicking off everywhere in the world, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button on this channel. We cover all 4 of the major regions as well as the NACL every single week on this channel. And, you know, Worlds is right around the corner. If you want a comprehensive overview of a lot of the teams that are going to be in the mix for qualifying for the World Championships, this is the place for that. So go ahead and hit subscribe, hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.